China. Once a deeply divided and impoverished agricultural nation, torn apart by internal conflict. Today, the country has been transformed into a united and formidable industrial powerhouse. Its rapid rise can be attributed to the role played by the Communist Party of China, or CPC. The party has overcome many obstacles to deliver modernity and prosperity, which the people have dreamed of for over a century.
这100年的发展，这是我们感同身受的。我们一个强大的中国，一个强大的中国共产党。
China's rise as an emerging superpower is nothing short of meteoric. It has a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. It has overtaken Japan as the world's second largest economy. It also boasts of one of the world's most powerful armies. And in January this year, China announced it has wiped out absolute poverty in the country.
China opened up 800 million people almost, accredited by the World Bank, as actually being lifted out of extreme poverty. So this is really remarkable.
100 years after its creation in July 1921, the CPC has now emerged as the main driving force behind China's ambition to be one of the world's most prosperous nations and a leading global power. But how far can the party go in its efforts to achieve the China dream? Will a more powerful China be a threat to the international world order?
I think it was always inevitable that when China got wealthy, it would reach for more power.
But is that really what China or the party wants?
For about 100 years, China suffered from foreign aggressors, occupiers of all kinds. So the Chinese people demanded a full respect for the Chinese nation.
May 15, 2021. It's a crowning moment and a key milestone for China. That's when its top astroscientists guided the Zhurong space rover and safely landed the spacecraft. The historical feat makes China only the third nation to have successfully landed on Mars, an accomplishment matched only by the US and Russia. The space mission is also a clear demonstration of China's scientific capability and technological prowess. The Mars landing is yet another feather in the cap for the Communist Party of China, especially this year as the party gears up to celebrate its 100th anniversary celebrations. But how is China able to catapult itself from a poor agrarian nation in the 1920s to a global superpower today? This was China in the 1920s, a backward and poor agrarian society. The period was marked by a bitter power struggle between the Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, and the ruling party, the Kuomintang, also known as the Nationalists, led by General Chiang Kai-shek. The Nationalists were far superior in almost every aspect, including organization, finance, and firepower. In 1927, Chiang Kai-shek launched a violent suppression against the Communist Party to wipe out the communist strongholds once and for all. The military response forced the communists to retreat. Some 80,000 people embarked on a year-long, treacherous journey known as the Long March. They crossed 8 provinces, mainly on foot, covering 9,000 kilometers through some of the most difficult terrains to escape the violent purge by the nationalist forces.
and the Soviets were basically in trouble. They were completely surrounded, and finally they broke away, escaped on the long march to safety further in the north where the Kuomintang was not powerful. So they did that. It was a heroic thing, but it was actually a defeated army that was trying to escape from the Kuomintang. But they survived. A very small number, very small percentage survived.
The fate and fortune of the communists began to change following Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. The war gave the Communist Party the window of opportunity to consolidate itself against a common enemy and to outsmart the ruling nationalists. The ruling KMT was then facing a triple threat from Japanese invasion, communist uprising, and warlords' insurrection. It needed all the help it could get to stay in power.
But it was really during the Japanese War that the Communist Party really had their chance. Because in that sense, if there had not been no war against Japan, the nationalists would have concentrated all their efforts at destroying the Communist Party.
All of a sudden, the once bitter enemy became a reluctant ally. Both armies joined forces to kick the Japanese invaders out of China. The KMT controlled the cities, while the communists operated from the countryside.
But that gave them, in the end, the advantage, because that's where the majority of people were. And if you could satisfy the peasants and give them what the peasants want, you talk with the peasants. And that's the secret of the success of the Chinese Communist Party.
But after the war, conflict resumed between the KMT and the communists. Efforts at establishing a coalition government failed. By 1946, the two sides were already fighting an all-out war. But the communists had a clear advantage.
You find everywhere it was the Kuomintang controlled the cities and the communists the countryside. And everywhere they surrounded city after city, each case, and then either suffocating the city, in a way, blockade, and eventually, one after the other, they defeated the Kuomintang. When they actually came to direct warfare, the actually nationalists had an advantage. They had better arms, airplane support and everything, whereas the communists had very limited arms. But they had the numbers, they had the discipline, and wherever they fought in the countryside, they had the sympathy of the peasants, and that gave them that advantage.
And with the peasant population firmly behind them, the communists rode the populist wave to victory in the civil war against the nationalists, who then retreated to the island of Taiwan. The communists had successfully united the whole of China and came to power on October 1st, 1949.
It was very traumatic. That civil war broke out again very soon between the communists and the KMT, and the Communist Party of China want to liberate the whole nation of China, to give them land so that people can work in freedom without suffering from the suppressions and exploitation of the ruling classes. And eventually, the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people choose the Communist Party of China as their ruling party, and this led to the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949.
It was really, for the first time in the history of China, that finally they have consolidated all the provinces and territories, and then Chinese people have stood up, as Chairman Mao proclaimed at Tiananmen Square in 1949.
But the years that followed were marked by ambitious economic and social policies implemented by the party, and that proved to be a disaster for the nation. In 1958, Mao introduced a 5-year plan of forced agricultural collectivization and rural industrialization known as the Great Leap Forward, to vastly increase China's agricultural and industrial output through labor-intensive methods to catch up with the West. But the plan proved to be a massive failure of historic proportions.
Local leaders were told they had to meet certain quotas for steel and for agricultural goods. And so they reported that they had in fact met those goals and exceeded them, when in fact they had fallen terribly short. Then based on their falsely reported yields, the government took away and taxed their local agricultural produce, which meant that there was nothing in the warehouses and people starved.
It was indeed a very challenging period for most people. Many were left with nothing much to eat and were lucky to be even alive.
小时候生活还是比较艰苦，这个主要是缺吃缺穿，条件非常艰苦，精神层面的生活可能就更谈不到了。没有多少米粒儿，上面主要是一些米汤，哎，所以呢，我们当时我母亲说，你看今天的这个粥啊，不远就有一个米粒儿，不远就一个米粒儿，就说这粥稀呀，就是这个。然后呢，他要把那个米要给我父亲吃，因为他要干活。
戴一强，他们心中的和那时候正赶上中国3年自然灾害的时期，凭粮票，抽烟要凭烟票，所有的一切物资都是一种票证化。那么1毛钱，妈妈给1毛钱，我在郑州的饭店里说来一碗面条，所有人吃面条都拿手捂住自己的碗，多到一块吃，那里面要饭的很多。当年整个中国面临着3年自然灾害，虽然我们解放，虽然我们获得了自由，但是那个时期，那么自然灾害，我们这个国家仍然在痛苦之中。
A lot of it was really utopian, and he had no scientific basis, and he had really nobody who understood what he wanted to do or could do it. It could not be done, but he was just determined. He pushed as hard as he could, and he caused a tremendous economic disaster to occur during the Great Leap Forward. Millions died.
At least 45 million people died as a result of the policy failure, mainly due to starvation. By 1962, the party's credibility had taken a big hit in the eyes of the people, and the collective leadership found it necessary to restore faith in the party. Quietly, Mao Zedong began to be sidelined by members of the Communist Party.
Within the party, people who used to follow him began to doubt his wisdom and doubt his capacity to lead to a steadily developing industrialized China. He was getting it wrong because he was pushing in a different way. So the dissensions within the party began, and it became more serious. And so in the end, they were pushing Mao Zedong aside, pushing him upstairs, as it were.
Sensing a threat to his rule and believing that communist leaders had steered the party in the wrong direction, Mao Zedong fought back. He went on to reassert his authority and launched the Cultural Revolution in August 1966. He called on the nation's youth to purge what he called impure elements in the Chinese society and to revive the revolutionary spirit. In essence, Mao whipped up a national frenzy to persecute all his political enemies in the party.
His voice was irresistible. He was like God, king, who had led the revolution, the father of the revolution. He could say it, he could do no wrong, so to speak. In fact, the Cultural Revolution, the Communist Party was not in the picture. It was Mao Zedong's revolution. And the Communist Party was being sort of really just leftovers of a few people who were, the ignorant ones were following him. All the leaders were all set aside, if not killed.
The Cultural Revolution led to 10 long years of social turmoil and tremendous economic hardship, bloodshed, hunger, and stagnation. It only ended with Mao's death in 1976. Historians believe that between 500,000 and 2 million people lost their lives as a result of the Cultural Revolution.
They neglected economic and industrial development. For example, the whole country was in great political turmoil. These were all very unfortunate events. However, I would say China learned a big deal, and the Chinese nation actually matured in these political uncertainties and great turmoil. Why? Because we eventually knew for sure that there must be a better way for China.
And the better way for China came unexpectedly in the form of a portly 74-year-old communist revolutionary veteran, Deng Xiaoping. But how did a 74-year-old war veteran restore the credibility of the Communist Party after the catastrophic events of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution? How did he alter the course of China's destiny? Zhong Fuchuan is from the Uyghur tribe. It's a small ethnic minority found mainly in northern China. But the 48-year-old businessman is based in Beijing, which is a 17-hour drive from his hometown in Gansu province, one of the poorest regions in the country. Coming from a poor family, Zhong had to overcome many obstacles in his life, trying to eke out a living, especially during his growing up years. But not today. He's now a very successful entrepreneur who runs multiple businesses, from mining to trading and real estate. And he's also seen with his own eyes just how much the country has progressed over the years.
过去都是房子也很破啊，各种水电，交通的环境也很差。经过这些年的发展，首先交通有所变化，通讯设施全部完善，完了当地的医疗、教育、卫生，跟我们的这个扶贫工作以前的变化完全是不一样的。
And he owed this success of the nation's phenomenal physical transformation to the Communist Party of China and the vision of one man, Deng Xiaoping. He feels that it's through Deng's ideas and vision that have allowed many ordinary citizens like him to progress and prosper.
我创业的时候呢，实际上已经是江总书记江泽民执政，总理应该是李鹏总理，我记得。 但是那种背景呢，还是邓小平的这种一个大的一个背景下，就是不管白猫、黑猫，抓住老鼠就是好猫。在这种环境下，给了中国非常宽松的一个市场发展环境。
Deng Xiaoping emerged from the horrors of the Cultural Revolution following the death of Mao Zedong in September 1976. He became China's top leader of the party 2 years later. Having seen the huge failure of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, he took drastic and decisive action to steer the country away from Maoist ideology. It was not only meant to improve the lives of the people, but also to win back their trust in the Communist Party.
Mao Zedong's great mistake was to undermine the Communist Party itself and almost destroyed it. So now his job as a good communist was to restore the Communist Party to its proper leadership position, gain credibility again, and his way of doing so was, number one, economic reforms. That unless the economy was doing well and socialism actually provided prosperity for people, at least the hope for better living standards and people's well-being was better preserved, guaranteed, the Communist Party would not win supporters.
59-year-old Victor Gao is Deng Xiaoping's former official translator, and he had observed closely the paramount leader's ideas and solemn commitment to eliminate poverty. His main mission then was to lead China towards prosperity and to restore faith in the party.
He basically said towards the end of the 1970s that if socialism means poverty, then it was not a political system we want to have. However, he said very proudly, I believe socialism can generate productivity and prosperity for the people. Deng basically believed, and the CPC and the Chinese government believed, that poverty was not a good thing for the Chinese nation. No one wanted to be poor. We wanted to improve our living standards. We want to be proud and rich and wealthy and better fed and better educated and better taken care of.
Under Deng Xiaoping, China embarked on a remarkable journey of reforms. China moved away from a centrally planned economy and adopted a capitalist market economy. It's a marked departure from the socialist ideology of shared ownership of resources and central planning. His open-door policy had attracted foreign investments and technology into the country. It allowed China to rise from the wreckage of the Cultural Revolution and set the foundation for China's accelerated growth.
Mao had kicked the foreigners out in 1949. Deng Xiaoping invited them back in. But he was very clear about why. He said, we're letting the foreigners in, despite the history of exploitation of China by foreigners, because we need foreign managerial expertise, we need technology, and we also need capital. Deng Xiaoping did not adapt the capitalist system whole hog, and he moved very gradually by letting first street vendors operate based on capitalist principles, setting prices, letting supply and demand determine price. And he did this to increase the wealth of China, to increase the material and technological well-being of the Chinese people, and yes, also to improve the power and the performance of the Chinese Communist Party, because his legitimacy was based on performance.
Deng's decisive moves had helped restore domestic stability in the country. Under his leadership, economic growth skyrocketed throughout much of the 1980s. And soon after, faith and trust in the Communist Party as the right leaders of the nation was restored once again.
每个国家、每个政党、每个只要是人，他都会有这样那样的一些理解上的偏差。所以呢，共产党最伟大的是发现错了就改，而且改得很彻底，改得非常的科学，也改得非常的认真。
But not all Chinese citizens agree with the policies of the Communist Party of China. Human rights activist and lawyer, 48-year-old Deng Biao is one of them. Deng Biao was kidnapped 3 times by the secret police in China for his human rights activities. In 2014, he left China and has been living in exile in the US ever since. While Deng acknowledges that the Communist Party of China has delivered the economic goods to the people, he believes the accomplishment is far from complete.
Many people may argue that China has become the second largest economy. That's a huge achievement, and I don't deny that. But I always emphasize the shadow behind the so-called China miracle, like the low human rights, the freedom, and the political system, and the environmental degradation, the corruption. We should not say that the Communist Party has a political legitimacy because of the rapid economic growth.
In 1986, as China's economic progress rapidly picked up speed, the demands for political liberalization had also gained strength among students in university campuses. Tens of thousands of people eventually marched through Beijing to Tiananmen Square, calling for freedom, democracy, and free speech. The momentum culminated in the Tiananmen tragedy of June 6, 1989.
Tiananmen was a shock to him as well as to the rest of the world, because the Tiananmen showed that when he opened up, even among the young Chinese, young students especially, they took it much further than Deng Xiaoping intended. And I think Deng Xiaoping took that as a warning that the opening had gone too far. So he crushed the...
The official death count of Tiananmen, according to the Communist Party, was 300, while others estimated it to be in the thousands.
Foreign corporations and NGOs and universities left China in droves, and China was, for a period of time, a pariah state. And Deng was asked how his economic reform program could go forward without the foreigners.
Following the shocking tragedy and the mass exodus of foreign capital in the aftermath of the Tiananmen crackdown, how was the party going to deliver the promise of better life to its people? Did it mark the end of China's economic miracle? Tiananmen Square. Located at the heart of the nation's capital, Beijing. It's known as the Gate of Valor and a revolutionary symbol of Chinese pride. It derives its name from the massive stone of Tiananmen, or the Gate of Heavenly Peace. But that peace was shattered following a crackdown against the Chinese students on June 4, 1989. Overnight, the site was turned into a symbol of defiance against communist rule. The harsh military response shattered the people's belief in the party, which claimed to be the protector of the people. While Deng Xiaoping promised and delivered economic reforms, political freedom was never on the cards. Tiananmen was a wake-up call and turning point for the Communist Party.
It is important to note that he never really went for what the rest of the world would recognize as political reform in China. Economic reform, yes. Political reform, no. The party never left. You never had anything like Western freedoms, not even close.
In the aftermath of the Tiananmen tragedy, conservative voices were very vocal in their opposition against the pace of reforms. They felt the country was moving too fast and had deviated too far from the socialist model. But Deng took the opposite view. Instead of reverting to a centrally planned economy, he felt more reforms should be implemented, not less. Deng further reaffirmed this reform agenda in his great tour to the south in 1992.
And you can see thereafter, the economic reforms became very serious. He went to the south and virtually became very capitalistic. He was actually encouraging more and more capitalist ways, entrepreneurial methods of finance, economic development, all the theories of scientific and technological improvement. Adopt them all. Send the best students abroad, let them come back and bring China up.
So the tacit deal that Deng makes with the Chinese people is stop advocating for political reform and Western-style freedoms, and we will deliver through gradual adaptation of capitalist ways of running the economy, increases in your standard of living year on year. So we will make China wealthy, but we will not make China free. And the Chinese people seemed by and large to accept that deal as long as the party continued to deliver economically.
The transformation of China's economy soon went into overdrive with the establishment of special economic zones in Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. Market liberalization released the pent-up energies of thousands and millions of enterprising Chinese, hungry and eager to make a better life for themselves.
The Communist Party needed to satisfy the people's wish to be economically better off, to be more secure financially and so on, and to feel that the possibility of being even better, that your children and grandchildren will be better than you. That is a tremendous psychological need for everybody under those conditions.
Beijing businessman Zhong Fuquan, for one, is a happy man. To him, a liberalized economy is good for business. And he's one of the main beneficiaries of Deng's open door and market reform policies. They had provided important support and catalyst for his businesses to grow and prosper.
当年我印象中是在苏州工业园区，也是一个很好的一个合作的一个典范和模板。像我们国内的企业家，从早期的这个，像我们那个时代，比较有代表性的企业家，都是因为顺应国家的一些倡导，国家政策的支持，发展起来非常快。比如说像最早期，就是香港啊，这个有很多投资在内地，都是内地政府非常扶持的。香港呢是跟国际社会接轨比较早的一些企业，对中国的这个投资发展能带来一个很好的模板和示范，包括新加坡。
The successive leaders of the party, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, inherited Deng's vision. Both leaders have implemented Deng's economic reforms policies in earnest, and that led to an explosion of wealth across the country. Much to the envy of the rest of the world, China boasted a sustained average GDP growth of over 9% annually from 1979 to 2010. It reached a historic high of 15% in 1984. It was the highest rate of per capita economic growth in major world economies, raising eyebrows across the world with its astonishing speed. China's ascension to the World Trade Organization, or WTO, in 2001 was a landmark event for China. It marked the country's integration into the global economic order to boost its exports to the rest of the world and contributed to China's prosperity.
During this time, you see China actually joined WTO, which is a great step towards China integration with the world. Since China joined WTO, China's import has increased 6 times from all world, which is a great contribution to the international trade market. But also China's export has increased 7 times, and China has become the largest trading nation with 130 countries.
And suddenly the doors were open, and it was extremely exciting. And so a lot of Americans, corporations and institutions got involved in China simply for that reason. But there was also the profit motive. The Western powers were very much involved in enabling and catalyzing the rise of China throughout the Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin, and for the most part the Hu Jintao period.
However, the breakneck speed of industrialization and urban development began to take a toll on the Chinese social fabric. The explosion of wealth was unevenly distributed across China, and corruption began to creep into the system in a very big way.
Indeed, corruption was huge in China, unprecedented in terms of the level of seniorities involved, the extent involved, the scope of money or wealth involved, etc. I would say if China continued to tolerate corruption, and sometimes individual or even institutional corruption, without reining them in, this probably would be the end of the Communist Party of China.
Within the bureaucracy, within the Communist Party, within even the People's Liberation Army, everybody was so encouraged to take part in business and money making and so on. And inevitably, in the course of doing that, corruption became endemic, part of the system. And during Jiang Zemin's time and Hu Jintao's time, These party leaders saw it coming, but didn't know how to control it. They failed to do that during that time. Everybody looked after their own interests and tried to make more money. It was allowed, it was encouraged. And the cause of that, corruption became so widespread.
But all that was to change following the rise of 59-year-old Xi Jinping, who became the party's general secretary in 2013. How has Xi altered the course of China? Will his vision for a more prosperous and powerful China, led by an increasingly centralized Communist Party, bring itself on a collision course with the world's superpower, the United States? Dongguan City in southern Guangdong province is often called the world's factory. The city is home to one of the largest global manufacturing bases in China. From a garments manufacturing base in the 1980s, it's now a hub for smart manufacturing of robotics and automated equipment. 32-year-old Jason Young is a typical Dongguan entrepreneur. Even at a relatively young age, he has several startups under his wings, ranging from F&B, healthcare, to blockchain technology. He spent almost a decade in the US and Canada studying music and art, only to witness a dramatic transformation to his country of origin upon his return 5 years ago.
后来有一次我回到中国之后呢，我发现在路上、在商场上、在吃饭、在看的所有的东西改观了我一些的看法。基本上感觉在中国，我想有什么就有什么，因为信息发达、四通八达，我们的网络技术到处都是非常发达的。我想干嘛都行，而且在现在这个中国的经济的这个环境下面呢，我可以讲这句话，就是说，如果你想吃上一口饭不会饿肚子。 挣点钱非常容易。
The Communist Party of China has been praised for its economic modernization program. The reform policies have propelled China from backwardness to being an economic powerhouse. But the newfound prosperity has also given rise to other social problems. Among them, growing wealth inequality and massive corruption. Xi Jinping, who was elected president in 2013, has made the fight against corruption the cornerstone of his reign. It's a means of bolstering the image and legitimacy of the party in the eyes of the people.
If the Liberation Army itself is corrupt and the top leaders of the army are corrupt, you are really in grave danger. And I would say that Xi Jinping came in 2013 really concerned for the collapse, total collapse of the Communist Party. And his primary instinct was to save the Communist Party. Like Deng Xiaoping in 1978, after Mao Zedong. This was the consequences of Deng Xiaoping's reforms, gone too far. So we had to find a solution.
He did things which was unbelievable and unimaginable. And I think he impressed the whole country, the whole Chinese nation, for his courage and his boldness and his assertiveness in cleaning up the system. There will be no future for China. And the CPC may be doomed if it does not fight against corruption. And the People's Republic of China may not develop that rapidly if it is burdened down by such massive institutionalized corruptions.
After consolidating his power within the party, Xi then went on to introduce his political doctrine for China for the next 30 years. The core goal of his ideology is to restore the country to its past glory, to build a prosperous economy and a well-respected global power. He reminded the people that the Communist Party is the only party that can deliver what he calls the China dream, and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation.
With the China Dream, Xi Jinping is trying to reclaim what China has always seen as its rightful place in the world, as a highly respected world power. The way he put it is that under Mao Zedong, China stood up, meaning that Mao reclaimed China for the Chinese. Under Deng Xiaoping, China developed, China got wealthy. And now under himself, under Xi Jinping, China is going to take its place at the center of world affairs. So the China Dream is, for Xi Jinping, both a dream about Chinese global power.
China is close to becoming the most influential country in the world today. It's already overtaken Japan as the world's second largest economy. The nuclear-armed nation boasts of one of the world's most powerful armies. It's also on track to become a global technology leader.
We achieved a new vision for China. And I think in the first phase, as I mentioned, China became a very powerful military power, which I think the Chinese nation deserves, because for about 100 years, China suffered from foreign aggressors, occupiers of all kinds, many European countries, but also countries from other parts of the world. So the Chinese people demanded a full respect for the Chinese nation. And we wanted to have pride in being Chinese. We wanted to have a proud Chinese nation standing on the global stage.
Economists have estimated that China will overtake the US as the world's #1 economy in 10 years. That has now forced Washington to sit up and take notice of China's global ambition. Some observers believe that the liberal capitalist system championed by the West has now come under threat by capitalist authoritarian states with their booming economies, including China.
In many ways, the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party is not about communism. It is now a question between a free, liberal way of protecting a rule-based international order as compared with an authoritarian, navel-gazing, self-interested, China-first kind of nationalistic way of just defying the rule-based order. And that is not acceptable, and I think this is what it's about. It's, in a way, both are now using capitalism. Very different ways. Of course, you can define capitalism, it must be liberal. It doesn't have to be. The capitalist methods of science, technology, and business and finance methods can be used by authoritarian governments too. And what we're looking at is a liberal and an illiberal authoritarian capitalism in competition and often in conflict. And what we're trying to see it, if it's possible, to have these two coexist without a full-scale Third World War.
Former US President Donald Trump has singled out China as America's strategic rival in 2017. And that position has not changed under current President Joe Biden. The rivalry has since intensified beyond trade issues. The two powers now appear to be entangled in an existential race for geopolitical and technological supremacy. But is it the Communist Party's vision to replace the US as the world leader? If that is so, will it be a responsible global power? Will China dominate the 21st century with its brand of authoritarian capitalist model?
No, I don't think so. China will be the largest economy in the world, but the largest economy doesn't mean automatically the top dog of the world. China will fiercely defend its national interest, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, that's for sure. But it doesn't mean that there is only one future for China and the United States. That is an eternal enemy between China and the United States.
They don't want that kind of dominance. What they want is to be so secure, so safe, prosperous and hopeful for progress, that they will gain the world's respect for the way they are doing things and be left alone to do it their way. And they will not do it the United States way. They will do it their way, and they will show that they can do it without the United States, which can also succeed. Doing the things that China wants makes itself successful and respected.
On the 100th anniversary of its founding in July, the Communist Party of China certainly has a lot to look back on and celebrate. It has made remarkable achievements in the span of just a century. It remains a question mark whether greater authoritarianism and strongman politics is what the country needs now and in the years to come. President Xi Jinping has already pledged that by 2049, China will become a great modern socialist country. What does he mean by that? And should the rest of the world worry about that ambition?
What does it mean to be a great modern socialist country? Certainly China has a very good chance of achieving that goal within its borders, unto itself. The issue is, how does China's attempt to legitimize and spread its domestic illiberal practices internationally, how does that sit with the rest of the world? So the question is not what does Xi Jinping envision within China's borders. It's what does he envision for China in its interactions with the rest of the world, and how does he want to be accommodated by the outside world? That's what makes people nervous.
For more than 100 years, the United States economy has always been the largest in the economy. They need to get accustomed to the changing circumstances and the rapid transformation of the world and the high, rapid development of the Chinese economy. And we need to look at China as it is, rather than, for example, feel traumatized by the Chinese development. It is a country on the right roadmap of economic development.
And as long as Xi Jinping and the Communist Party can provide answers to the people and satisfy the people, they will support them, not some abstract ideal of rule-based order of human rights and democracy and freedom, but something that is good for China and enables the Chinese people to continue to prosper.